Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we are diving into something extraordinary, the complete story of the book of Romans, like you've never seen it before. Now, before you think you've already heard this story 100 times, let me tell you, you haven't heard it like this, because behind the words written almost 2,000 years ago lies a drama that changed the world forever. A letter from a man sitting in the shadows of the Roman Empire, writing to people he had never met. And yet, that letter would reshape history, stir revolutions of thought, and ignite movements of faith across continents. Picture this: the city of Rome in the 1st century. Streets filled with merchants, slaves, soldiers, and philosophers. Every corner of the empire whispers of power, glory, and fear. The emperor sits on his throne, worshipped like a god, while the people chase after wealth, honor, and survival. And in the middle of this mighty empire, a small community of Jesus followers is trying to hold on to their faith. They are outnumbered, misunderstood, and often persecuted. Yet they carry a message that could shake the empire to its very foundations. And then comes Paul. Not a general, not a king, not even a man of wealth. Paul is a traveler, a preacher, a former enemy of the very faith he now proclaims. And from the city of Corinth, he writes to this fragile community in Rome. But this isn't just any letter. The book of Romans is a masterpiece, layered with hope, conflict, struggle, and victory. It's not just theology, it's a survival guide, a manifesto, and a love letter all at once. It deals with questions that still haunt us today. Why is the world broken? Is there any hope for humanity? How can people of different backgrounds find unity? And what does it truly mean to live a transformed life? As the words unfold, you begin to realize this is not simply about ancient Rome. This is about us, our struggles with division, our hunger for meaning, our search for grace when everything seems hopeless. And Paul, with pen in hand, dares to tackle the biggest questions anyone could ever ask. His sentences climb like mountains, reaching breathtaking heights of thought, and then plunge into valleys of raw, human honesty. Every line is charged with urgency, as if he knows lives are on the line. Not just theirs, but ours too. But here's the twist. This letter wasn't just meant to comfort the weak. It was meant to challenge the strong. It was written to a community on the edge, to people who were about to face trials that would test their faith in ways they couldn't imagine. And just when you think you've grasped the heart of Romans, you discover Paul is pointing toward something even greater, something that would demand everything from those who believed. So, the question is, why would one man risk everything to write this letter? And what secret inside it was powerful enough to outlast the Roman Empire itself? Stay with me, because the story of Romans is about to take a turn that no one in the 1st century could have predicted. When we step into the world of the 1st century, it's hard to imagine just how fragile everything really was. Rome was the superpower of its day, with roads stretching across continents, armies stationed in faraway lands, and a system of law and order that kept millions of people under its control. On the surface, it looked unshakable, like a kingdom that would last forever. But beneath that shining image of power, the empire was full of tension. Slaves longing for freedom, cultures clashing under Roman rule, and citizens restless with questions that no temple or philosopher seemed able to answer. It was into this world of uncertainty and unrest that the book of Romans first appeared. Now, think about the people who first heard this letter. They weren't sitting in grand palaces or marble halls. Most of them were ordinary men and women, merchants, servants, mothers, children, even a few who had once been part of the Jewish community, and others who had grown up worshipping the Roman gods. Their lives were complicated. They lived with fear of persecution, but also with the daily struggles of trying to survive in a city that demanded loyalty to Caesar. Yet somehow, word had spread about Jesus, a man who had been crucified under Rome's authority but was said to be alive again. The story had traveled from Jerusalem through Greece and now had found its way to Rome itself. Paul knew this community was special. Rome wasn't just another city, it was the heart of the empire, the place where every culture and every idea came to clash. If the message of Jesus could take root here, it could spread to the entire world. But Paul also knew that this church was facing pressure from every side. Jewish believers argued over the law of Moses, while Gentile believers tried to understand what it meant to follow a God they had never known before. Add to that the suspicion of Roman officials, and you had a group of people caught in a storm that threatened to tear them apart. So why did Paul write Romans? Because he saw what was at stake. This wasn't just about one church in one city. This was about a vision big enough to change humanity. The words he wrote weren't gentle suggestions. They carried urgency, like a man trying to warn others before the floodwaters rise. Each phrase pulled back the curtain on the human condition, exposing pride, fear, and the deep hunger for grace. And just as the early church gathered in secret to listen, leaning into every word, we too are drawn into this unfolding drama. But what exactly was Paul trying to prepare them for? Why did he fill his letter with such sweeping visions of hope, while at the same time warning of struggles that lay ahead? The answer lies hidden in the lines of Romans, and as we move deeper into the story, the tension only grows stronger. The heart of the conflict in Romans wasn't just political pressure or fear of persecution. It ran even deeper, into the question of identity itself. Who truly belonged to the people of God? For centuries, the Jewish people had carried the law, the promises, the covenants. They believed they were the chosen ones. But now, through Jesus, doors were opening wide to Gentiles, to outsiders who had no history with the law of Moses, no temple sacrifices, no heritage in the promises of Abraham. This clashed with everything many of the Jewish believers had been taught, and it raised a dangerous tension. Could two groups so different, with such opposite backgrounds, truly become one? Paul does not soften this tension in his letter. He exposes it. He talks about sin, not just as individual mistakes, but as a power that grips the entire human race. He paints the picture of humanity standing guilty, whether Jew or Gentile, rich or poor, slave or free. It was not about who followed more rules or who came from the right family. It was about something far deeper. This truth was unsettling because it leveled everyone, stripping away pride and security, and leaving every soul desperate for the same grace. But this conflict wasn't just theological. Imagine the church in Rome gathering together in someone's home. On one side of the room sits a man who once worshipped Jupiter in the temples, and across from him, a woman who grew up memorizing the law of Moses. Both are trying to understand this radical message of Jesus. Both are trying to live as one family while their old worlds pull them apart. And as the Roman authorities tighten their grip, suspicion begins to grow. How long could such a fragile unity last under the shadow of the empire? As the letter is read aloud in the dimly lit room, the air feels heavier with every sentence. Paul's words strike at the very core of their fears and their hopes. He speaks of a righteousness that doesn't come from keeping the law or from following the ways of Rome, but from faith itself, a gift offered freely to all who believe. It sounds liberating, but it also feels dangerous. If this is true, then the old walls of division must fall. And if those walls fall, the world as they know it will never be the same. You can almost imagine the faces in that room. The Jewish believer who wonders if the traditions of his ancestors are slipping through his fingers. the Gentile convert who wonders if he will ever truly belong. The quiet slave in the corner, listening with wide eyes, daring to believe that he is worth the same in God's sight as the nobleman sitting across the table. And outside those walls, the Roman Empire looms, demanding loyalty, ready to crush anything that threatens its order. Paul's words are relentless. He talks about life and death, about being enslaved to sin or set free through grace. He writes as though the whole creation itself is groaning, waiting for something new to break through the darkness. It's a vision that stirs the heart, but also unsettles the mind. Because if what Paul says is true, then the believers in Rome are being called into something far bigger than survival. They are being asked to risk everything, to live with a boldness that could cost them their lives. The tension is now unbearable. Will this fragile community stand together when the storm comes, or will the weight of empire and division tear them apart? Just when it seems the weight of Paul's message is already almost too much to bear, a second layer of conflict begins to emerge. The believers in Rome realize that the struggle is not only outside with the empire, nor only between Jew and Gentile inside the church. The real battle is within themselves. Paul's words cut deep when he confesses his own struggle. How even he, the great apostle, feels torn between doing what is right and falling into what he hates. This admission shocks his audience. If Paul himself wrestles like this, what hope is there for anyone else? The room grows quiet as his words sink in. He is not presenting himself as a perfect leader, but as a fellow traveler caught in the same tension. The people listening are left unsettled. They thought the problem was Rome. They thought the problem was division. But now they see the problem lives in every human heart. Sin isn't only an external enemy. It is inside, always pulling, always whispering. This realization raises the stakes higher than ever, because it means the real battlefield is invisible. It's not only about surviving persecution, but about surviving themselves. And then Paul shifts again. He writes of a creation that waits with longing, as if the earth itself feels the corruption of sin. Suddenly, this isn't just about individuals or communities. It's about the entire world, groaning for redemption. The scope of the conflict explodes, reaching cosmic proportions. This is no small argument about laws and traditions. This is a story about life, death, and the destiny of the human race. The believers in that Roman house church are left staring at one another, realizing they are caught in something much bigger than they imagined. If Paul is right, then the fate of nations and the fate of souls are bound together in this struggle. And as the empire grows more suspicious, as neighbors whisper and authorities tighten their grip, the question presses down on them with new urgency. If even Paul cannot escape the struggle within, how will they stand when both the empire and their own weaknesses collide? The tension is stretched to its breaking point, but the answer remains just out of reach. The tension finally reaches its breaking point when Paul's letter declares a truth that shatters every barrier. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. The listeners lean in, as if the weight of the empire, of their divisions, of their own guilt, suddenly collides with this breathtaking promise. In one sweeping statement, Paul brings resolution to their deepest fears. The law, which once divided Jew and Gentile, no longer has the final word. Sin, which chained every human heart, has been defeated. Even death itself is stripped of its power. For the first time, the fragile group in Rome sees themselves not as scattered individuals from different worlds, but as one body, bound together by something greater than culture, tradition, or fear. The climax surges forward as Paul speaks of a love that nothing can separate them from. Not tribulation, not persecution, not famine, not even the sword. The room is charged with hope. The slave and the nobleman look at each other as equals. The Jewish woman and the Gentile man see one another as family. Suddenly, the empire outside feels smaller, less threatening. Rome may control armies, but it cannot control the love that binds this community together. This moment of unity feels unstoppable, like a revolution of the heart that no emperor can silence. And just when it seems the story has resolved in triumph, Paul adds a twist no one expected. He shifts the focus to Israel, to the people who had carried the promises for generations. He wrestles openly with the mystery of their place in God's plan, asking questions that still echo today. Has God abandoned his people? Has their story ended? The audience in Rome is left stunned. The victory feels complete, but now a new layer of mystery is unveiled. The story is not finished. God's plan is larger, deeper, and more complex than anyone imagined. The climax closes not with final certainty, but with an invitation into trust. The conflicts have found resolution in unity, grace, and unshakable love. But the twist reminds them, and us, that the story of Romans is bigger than one church, one empire, or even one generation. It is a story still unfolding, and its next chapter waits to be discovered. As the letter draws to a close, the believers in Rome are left with more than just answers. They are left with a vision for how to live in the heart of an empire that will never understand them. Paul doesn't end with lofty words that feel out of reach. Instead, he brings the message down to earth, urging them to live as a living sacrifice, to let their lives be transformed not by the patterns of Rome, but by the renewing of their minds. It is both simple and impossible at the same time. A calling that demands everything yet promises everything in return. He speaks of love as the highest command. Love that goes beyond cultural boundaries. Love that treats enemies with kindness. Love that refuses to repay evil with evil. For the church in Rome, this is not abstract teaching. It is survival. Their unity will not be preserved by laws or rituals, but by the way they love one another in the face of pressure, suspicion, and hardship. The merchant, the mother, the slave, the soldier, they all leave that gathering knowing their strength lies not in their differences, but in the grace that binds them together. Subplots that once threatened to divide now find their place in the larger story. The Jewish believer learns that his heritage is not erased, but fulfilled in Christ. The Gentile believer understands that he is no outsider, but fully welcomed into God's family. Even the tension with the empire, though unresolved in politics, is reframed. They may live under Caesar's rule, but their true allegiance is to a greater kingdom that cannot be shaken. And so, the book of Romans ends not with fear, but with confidence. The final words speak of a God who is able to establish them, who weaves all things into his plan, and whose wisdom is beyond comprehension. The house grows quiet as the last line is spoken, and the people know they have been given more than a letter. They have been given a roadmap, a hope, a reason to keep standing when everything around them feels uncertain. For us today, the story of Romans still carries the same power. It challenges our pride, heals our divisions, and reminds us that grace is stronger than guilt, and love is stronger than fear. The empire of Rome has long since crumbled, but the message of this letter still lives on, calling each of us into the same story. A story that began in a small house in the heart of Rome, but was always meant for the entire world.